In this course, I will introduce you to the property rights theory à la Grossman and Hart. This theoretical framework is quite new. It started with Grossman and Hart path-breaking article in 1986. The initial objective of the authors was to provide a good formalization of the transaction cost theory. As you will see, they failed, but instead they succeed in providing an original theoretical framework that leads to propositions that differ subsequently from transaction cost economics. Interestingly, the property rights theory is now one of the leading theoretical frameworks to analyze public contracting, and that is the topic we are interested in. So let me start by saying a few words about the theoretical framework that is proposed by Grossman and Hart articles. Assumptions that are written are the following. Economic actors are supposed to be rational. There is symmetric information, meaning that there is no adverse selection or no moral hazard problems. People are evolving in a risky environment. There is no uncertainty, like in the transaction cost theory framework. And lastly, contracts are incomplete. So how is this last assumption possible? Remember your course about transaction cost economics. Contracts are incomplete mainly because of uncertainty and bounded rationality. So how can we assume that contracts are incomplete in these theoretical frameworks if there is no uncertainty and no bounded rationality? The answer given by the property rights theory is that contractual incompleteness comes from asymmetric information or bounded rationality of third parties, courts, experts that are enforcing contracts. The idea is that even if contracting parties are able to craft complete contracts, specifying everything that must be done in every situation, third parties are not able to observe everything. Some part of the contracts, especially specific investment, human-specific investment, are observable by contracting parties, but not contractable because they are non-verifiable by third parties. So the best contracting parties can do is to sign an incomplete contract. Let me propose you a sketch of the theory. Models are usually based on a three-periods game, such that at date zero, contracting parties sign a contract that is specifying few things, knowing that investments are not contractable. At date one, parties invest or not, and they are not obliged to do that because parties were not able to contract on investments. And at date two, knowing level of investments that has been made, contracting parties renegotiate their contracts in order to adapt to the new situation. Renegotiation is supposed to be efficient. There is no renegotiation cost, no transaction cost. This is a Nash bargaining process that occurs, meaning that the surplus is shared between the contracting parties, net of the outside options. In this framework, the way property rights are distributed is essential because property rights give to the owner of the assets the residual rights of control, that is to say, the right to decide of the way to use assets in every case that is not foreseen by the contract. Thus, the owner of the asset has a higher outside option in case of conflict if no renegotiation occurs. So the story proposed by the property rights theory is looking like transaction cost economics. I mean, the starting point is to recognize that contracts are incomplete. Contractual incompleteness opens rooms for hold-up behavior, especially during the renegotiation process. Agents, economic actors anticipate this, and this anticipation distorts ex-ante investment, and property right distribution at date zero permits to influence this distortion by changing outside option, but there is no way to reach the first best. So you see that such story is not so far from transaction cost economics story. But, however, if we look carefully at the property right framework, the story proposed by the theory is clearly in opposition with transaction cost economics. Let me go into the detail. In the property right theory, integration does not change the level of control or negotiation per se. There is no hierarchy and forbearance contracts as in the transaction cost economics framework. This means that non-contractable investments are still non-contractable, and this does not change with vertical integration. But integrations gives to the parties that own the assets a higher outside option. This is the key. Incentives to invest are influenced by property rights. As stated by Oliver Hart, It would be too easy to construct a theory of the firm with the assumption that incentives are decreasing in the firm compared to the market. And that easy way to construct a theory is exactly what the transaction cost theory is doing. The property rights theory differs from transaction cost economics because on this point, they try to endogenize incentives to invest. Consequently, who integrates also becomes crucial in this property right theory. Party with the most important specific investment, that is to say, the party who develops specific investments that are creating the biggest part of the surplus, should integrate, and not the reverse. Also note that if investments made by parties are equally important, then what is optimal is a non-integration situation. Vertical integration would worsen the situation. So this is clearly one hypothesis that is going against the transaction cost theory. So the property rights theory is clearly failing at proposing a good formalization of the transaction cost theory. However, the theory proposes a new set of interesting hypotheses. But if they are, let's say, more precise than the transaction cost economics hypothesis, they are also nearly untestable. And if transaction cost economics is often viewed as an empirical success story, this is not yet the case of the property right theory. As I told you during the introduction of this class, the property right theory is also widely used in order to understand public contracting. Indeed, in a very famous paper that is now considered as a canonical paper, Art, Schleifer, and Vishny proposed a way to think about the proper scope of government. So the question is, considering one public services, should the government make with civil servants or buy to a private manager that is owning the assets? They propose an elegant formalization of this problem with a property right model, and they put on the table a very interesting proposition. More precisely, what they suppose is that in this model there is a manager that can make two kinds of efforts: innovation, human investment. This is more or less the same in this model, that are non-contractible at debt zero. So the manager can try to make some efforts in order to reduce costs or in order to increase quality. And what is interesting in this model is that you've got some adverse effects, meaning that when you are trying to reduce costs, you are also decreasing quality, and when you are trying to increase quality, you are also increasing cost. What the theory suggests is that a private manager, because he owns the asset, is receiving too much incentive to reduce cost compared to the first best, because he doesn't care about adverse effect on quality, and he also receives too low incentives to invest in quality compared to the first best, because if he invests to increase quality, he is obliged to renegotiate and to share profit with the government. By contrast, a public manager is not the owner of the assets, meaning that in every situation, if he's got an idea, if he invests in order to reduce cost or to increase quality, in every situation he needs to renegotiate with the government, and he might expect only a small part of the surplus that is created by his effort. So that is why he's making few efforts compared to the private manager, both in terms of quality and in terms of cost reduction. So what the model highlight by the end of the day is that even if the public manager is always underinvesting, there are few situations where the public solution is preferred compared to the private one, especially when adverse effects on cost reduction and quality are high, and when opportunities to innovate in order to increase quality are low. This space for public solution is even thinner, considering that this result stands as long as consumers cannot put in competition private manager. If they can, the authors suggest that private managers will internalize the externalities generated by their effort to reduce costs, and then the private managers that look for reducing costs is not anymore an issue. Think of universities. You might have some private managers. They might find some way to reduce costs. This might reduce the quality level. But at the end of the day, if students can choose to move from one university to another and put in competition those private managers, they will not reduce costs because they care about quality. Think of prisons. This is not the case. If you've got a private manager that finds some ways to reduce costs and hence decrease quality, prisoners cannot choose to move from one prison to another. So the model gives clear guidance about which kind of public services should be privatized or not. It also addresses bypassing the rule of corruption, but I have no time to develop this right now. So to conclude, the property rights theory is an interesting framework to understand the consequences of incomplete contracting and the way property rights distribution might change incentives to invest.